In March 2007, three college friends, Darren Mitchell, Lisa Connor, and Mark Alvarez, traveled to Arkansas to explore an isolated limestone system they'd heard locals call Echo Shade Cave. The entrance sat hidden in dense forest about 15 miles outside of Jasper, not far from the Buffalo National River. According to rumor, Echo Shade was a maze of winding, flooded passages that few dared to map. Darren had always pushed his friends to do things that tested their limits. He'd read about cave diving in online forums and convinced Lisa and Mark they could handle it with basic gear. A few rented tanks, masks, fins, and headlamps. They set out on a crisp Saturday morning, their backpacks clinking with scuba tanks and coils of rope. The entrance was a jagged opening in a mossy cliffside, just large enough to slip through. Inside, they found themselves crawling through narrow, dry passages until they reached a pool of perfectly still water. Its glassy surface reflected the beams of their lights, showing submerged tunnels that disappeared into blackness. Darren went first. He slipped beneath the water, guiding his headlamp forward. Lisa followed close, her breath echoing loudly in her regulator. Mark hesitated, glancing back toward the surface light before forcing himself to submerge. At first, the dive felt almost serene. The tunnels were wider than they expected, spacious chambers that created an eerie, cathedral-like silence underwater. Their lights bounced off limestone walls that shimmered with tiny crystals. They swam deeper, following a narrow tunnel that dipped steeply downward. About 40 feet in, Mark realized he'd lost sight of the others. He slowed, bubbles rising around him as he scanned the tunnel for a glimpse of Lisa's fins. A cold dread settled in his gut when he noticed how silty the water had become. Every kick stirred up clouds of particles, blinding him. Meanwhile, Darren and Lisa had reached a chamber where the tunnel split in two. Darren signaled to go left, but Lisa hesitated. Her gut told her it felt wrong. She turned to find Mark, but saw only a swirling cloud of silt and rock. Mark's heart pounded as he spun in place, trying not to kick up more silt. He checked his pressure gauge. He still had air, but not forever. Panic clawed at the edge of his mind. He reached out, brushing against the jagged walls, trying to feel his way back. Lisa, her lungs tight, decided to turn back for him. She retraced her route, fingers grazing the tunnel ceiling. Then she felt it. A faint vibration through the rock, a muffled clang. She flashed her light ahead and caught Mark's wide eyes staring back. He was stuck. His tank had wedged between two jutting rocks when he spun around. She kicked closer, signaled to stay calm. Mark tried to shift, but only lodged himself deeper. His exhale rattled through the passage, bubbles scraping the ceiling. Lisa reached for his harness, pulling gently, but the angles were wrong. Every tug felt like the rocks were closing tighter. Back in the split chamber, Darren realized no one was behind him. He turned, bubbles leaking from his regulator as his light flickered. The battery was failing. He swam back toward the silt cloud, heart hammering. In the milky water, he glimpsed Lisa's light and Mark's shape wriggling. Darren moved in, pressing his shoulder against the rock to create space, but the cave refused to give. The chill of the water seeped into Mark's arms and legs. He could feel the pressure gauge dropping faster now, his breathing ragged with panic. Lisa signaled him to keep calm, but they all knew they were running out of time. Above ground, the forest was silent. No one else knew they were there. No cell signal, no rescue team on standby. Darren's light went out. Total darkness swallowed them. He groped for Lisa's hand, squeezed it, an unspoken message. They had to try one last pull. Lisa braced her fins against the rock wall, grasped Mark's harness with both hands, and yanked with everything she had. A sickening pop echoed through the water. Mark slipped free, tank scraping the stone, but the force knocked his regulator from his mouth. He scrambled to grab it, sucking in frigid water. He choked, panicked, but Lisa jammed it back between his teeth, pounding his shoulder to keep him conscious. Together they kicked through the silty tunnel, Darren now trailing behind, following Lisa's flickering beam. It felt endless, A frantic crawl back toward that first pool, lungs burning, ears roaring with their own heartbeat. When they broke the surface, gasping, the forest above seemed impossibly bright. They dragged each other onto the mossy rocks, shivering, dripping, staring back at the cave's black mouth. None of them spoke for a long time. That day, Echo Shade Cave claimed none of them, but each carried it home in the pit of their gut, a cold memory of how close they came to being swallowed whole by the dark.
Deep beneath the chalk cliffs of southern England, 28-year-old Leon Carter thought he'd found his life's calling, exploring the unmapped caves hidden below the old quarry. He'd heard whispers from local divers, endless tunnels, shifting passages, water so clear you'd think you were floating in air. But what really drew Leon was the rumor of a passage that looped back on itself, a maze that had driven one diver mad. Equipped with 2 tanks and a single guideline reel, Leon squeezed through the first sump. It was tighter than he'd imagined, the cold biting into his dry suit. Beyond, the chamber opened into a cathedral-like vault. His torchlight flickered over untouched walls, white and smooth as bone. At first, everything felt under control. Leon's line hummed between his gloved fingers. He marked his turns, counted his breaths. But then he spotted something. Another line, older, frayed, disappearing into a narrow crack to his left. Curiosity won. He unclipped his reel and tied into the old line. It felt wrong, but his gut told him there was something more to find. The crack led him into a tunnel so tight he had to twist his shoulders sideways. 10 feet, 20. The line looped in circles. He should have turned back. Instead, he pushed on, squeezing through a section where the ceiling scraped his tank. His gauge read half. He knew the rule of thirds. He'd already broken it. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a pocket of air. Leon surfaced, ripping off his mask, gasping in the stale darkness. He shone his light around, the same white walls, the same markings on the stone. A chill ran down his spine. This was the same vault he'd just left. Impossible. He dropped back underwater, following the line backward, or what he thought was backward. Every twist looked the same. The silt clouded around him like smoke. Panic set in when he realized his line had looped onto itself. He couldn't tell where he'd come from, or where he was going. His air hissed through the regulator, each breath louder than the last. Then, a faint glow. His own torchlight reflected in a distant air pocket. He kicked hard, desperate to reach it. When he broke the surface, he was in the same vault again. The line trailed in circles like a cruel joke. Some say Leon's last thoughts were calm. Others say he died clawing at the rock, convinced the cave was alive, laughing at him. Today, that passage is sealed. Divers who pass by swear they hear tapping on the limestone, like someone still trying to find the way out. For Mark, Anna, and Paul, this trip was supposed to be the culmination of years of planning, countless hours of training, and a shared obsession with the unknown. The cave they had chosen, known locally as the Raven's Maw, had a reputation even among seasoned explorers. Narrow passages, unpredictable floods, and rumors that no one had ever mapped its deepest chambers. Of course, those were just stories. Mark scoffed at superstitions. Anna saw them as a challenge. Paul, always the cautious one, had his doubts, but trusted his friends more than the warnings. They entered the cave just after dawn, the outside world disappearing behind a wall of jagged limestone and darkness. The first few hours went smoothly. Narrow crevices, damp tunnels, and crystal-clear pools that mirrored their headlamps like cold glass. The deeper they went, the more the world above felt unreal, just a faint memory that faded with every step. By the 12th hour, they reached a passage so tight they had to crawl on their stomachs, pushing their bags ahead. It was here, in this suffocating corridor, that Mark found the opening to a side tunnel no map had recorded. Anna insisted they check it out. Paul hesitated. Their oxygen was running lower than planned, and the walls here were crumbling in places. But Mark laughed it off. "Come on, man, just a quick look." Inside, the air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. Their lights flickered against strange mineral formations that looked almost like claws scraping the stone. After another 30 minutes, the tunnel split again, forming a loop-like chamber. They paused to catch their breath. The silence here was crushing. No dripping water, no distant echoes, just the sound of their own strained breathing. When Paul turned back to check the entrance, he froze. The passage they'd just crawled through seemed smaller. The shifting limestone had shifted again, and the rocks now hung lower, jagged teeth ready to snap shut. He shouted for the others, but Anna was already wedged in, trying to squeeze through before it narrowed any further. Mark shoved his pack forward, his chest scraping the stone, grit and mud grinding into his skin. "Just keep moving, we can make it." But the earth had other plans. A deep, dull crack echoed through the rock. One by one, slabs of stone shifted, pressing tighter. Paul felt his own panic rise as he realized he couldn't move his legs. Mark's voice, usually calm and joking, was now strained and high-pitched. Anna's boots kicked frantically, trying to find leverage. They spent what felt like hours fighting the rock, each breath harder than the last. Their headlamps grew dimmer, batteries draining with every wasted minute. When Anna finally squeezed through to the other side, she turned back, but only Mark's arm was visible. Paul was still pinned, unable to free himself. "I can't feel my legs," Paul gasped, his voice echoing off the walls like a dying heartbeat. Mark tried to dig at the rocks, tearing at them until his fingernails split. Anna searched for any tool that might help, but their packs were wedged out of reach. The tunnel seemed to mock them, shifting imperceptibly every few minutes, each crack of stone making their hearts hammer in terror. Time became a blur, panic mixed with exhaustion. Their radio was useless now. The stone swallowed any signal whole. Mark looked into Paul's eyes, seeing the fear give way to a dull resignation. There was no way back, no space to turn around, and no one coming to help. Anna, barely holding back tears, whispered they needed to leave, to find another way through before the tunnel closed completely. Mark didn't answer. He knew they couldn't leave Paul, but he also knew they'd die if they stayed. In the end, the cave decided for them. Another rumble shook the walls, squeezing tighter. Paul's light went out first, a quiet click that left the tunnel in darkness. Mark felt his friend's grip loosen, heard a single, muffled breath, and then nothing. Anna pulled Mark by the shoulder, forcing him to back out inch by inch. When they finally crawled back into the main chamber, filthy, bruised, and trembling, they didn't say a word. The passage behind them was sealed, as if it had never existed. It took them 2 days to find the way back to the surface, wandering through pitch-black corridors, driven by guilt and the primal need to survive. When they emerged, blinking in the sunlight, their minds were still trapped underground, echoing with the memory of a friend they'd lost forever, swallowed by the darkness that never gives back what it takes. And deep below, in the crushing silence of the Raven's Maw, the rock waits, patient as ever, for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter its throat. Nathan Collins was no amateur. At 34, he had explored more caves and underwater systems than most divers twice his age. when he heard whispers of a newly discovered unmapped cave network in northern Georgia, he couldn't resist. Locals called it the Silent Vein, narrow, suffocatingly tight, and almost entirely underwater. On a humid morning, Nathan descended alone. He slipped into the black mouth of the cave, his headlamp the only light as he squeezed through twisting rock corridors. Hours passed, then silence. At 7:40 p.m., his safety check-in failed. Friends alerted authorities. A rescue team was deployed that night. Inside the cave, Nathan had become wedged in a vertical crevice just 20 inches wide. His oxygen tank had scraped the rock, causing a minor collapse behind him. He was now stuck, upside down, chest compressed, water dripping steadily from above. Despite his training, panic crept in. He radioed for help once, just one word: trapped. When rescuers reached the entrance, the narrow structure slowed everything. Equipment had to be dismantled. Rescuers could barely move. It took them 15 hours to locate him, and when they finally did, they were met with silence. Nathan was still breathing, barely. Medics pumped warm air through tubing to keep his body temperature up. Food gel packs and water were delivered through a long, thin hose. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "Still," he whispered, "tell my wife I tried." For 2 more days, they drilled through the rock to widen the passage, but it was too unstable. On the 4th day, his vitals stopped. Trapped under 40 feet of limestone, Nathan died with his eyes open, staring at the crack of light that never reached him. Recovery was deemed too dangerous. His body remains in the Silent Vein, a solemn warning carved into stone. Deep beneath the rolling hills of southern Kentucky, a team of 3 cave divers prepared to descend into a submerged cavern system few had ever dared to explore. The leader, Hannah Price, was an experienced diver who'd mapped parts of this cave before. But today, they planned to push deeper, beyond the last known chamber, following a narrow sump that might connect to a massive air pocket rumored by locals. The dive began smoothly. The entrance chamber was wide, echoing with their labored breaths and the hiss of air tanks. They submerged into the first flooded tunnel, light slicing through the murky water. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing them to swim single file. The water was cold, pressing in around their wetsuits as they kicked deeper and deeper. After 20 minutes, they reached a tight restriction. Hannah signaled for the others to wait as she squeezed through first. Her tank scraped the limestone, sending a shiver up her spine. Once through, she shined her light ahead. The passage seemed to widen again, just enough to swim without scraping. The second diver, Marcus, came next. He was bigger than Hannah and struggled to push his gear through. Silt erupted around him, clouding the water and cutting visibility to almost nothing. He felt his heart race, claustrophobia prickling at the edges of his mind. He exhaled, pushing forward until he popped through the other side. Their third diver, a younger man named Owen, hesitated. The silt had made the tunnel look like a black hole. He forced himself to calm down, counting his breaths. When he finally went for it, he misjudged his angle, and his tank lodged against an outcropping. He kicked and twisted, but the rock wouldn't budge. He was stuck. Panic set in quickly. Owen's breathing accelerated. His mask fogged slightly, and his gloved hands fumbled for his line. Hannah noticed the line had stopped moving. She swam back, forcing herself through the restriction until she reached him. She signaled for him to calm down and mimed the motion to remove his tank. He hesitated. The thought of detaching his life support system terrified him, but Hannah's eyes were firm. Together, they unstrapped it and gently maneuvered it around the rock. He wriggled through, gasping with relief once he reached the open space. The team floated there, catching their breath, lights bobbing like fireflies in the blackness. They knew they should turn back, but Hannah felt the draw of discovery. Against her better judgment, she gestured forward. They pushed on, the tunnel winding deeper, the water growing colder, and the ceiling pressing closer to their heads. Finally, the passage opened into a massive air chamber. The divers surfaced, pulling off their masks. The space was cathedral-like. Huge stalactites loomed above them, and their voices echoed off walls unseen. They found a muddy ledge to rest on, taking in the otherworldly beauty. But as they rested, the reality sank in. Their air reserves were dangerously low, and the return trip through the restriction would be even harder after stirring up all that silt. After 10 tense minutes, they agreed to head back. The journey was slow, every foot of rock feeling sharper, every twist more suffocating. Marcus scraped his tank again, dislodging more silt. Visibility vanished completely. Hands blindly followed the guideline while each diver prayed not to snag their gear. It took an eternity, but they all made it back through the restriction. The final swim to the surface felt endless. Lungs tight, lights dimming, their bodies exhausted. When they finally emerged back into the entrance chamber, they collapsed on the stone floor, tearing off their gear and gasping the cave's stale, glorious air. They had mapped another section. They had found the rumored chamber. But as they looked at each other, pale and shivering, they all knew the same thing. They'd come within a breath of never seeing daylight again. And the cave, deep, cold, and ancient, waited patiently for whoever might dare to test it next. It was November 12th, 1991. An experienced cave diver named Lucas Reinhardt was exploring newly discovered tunnels of the Frostbite cavern system in northern Sweden. He was accompanied by two friends, Jonas Lund and Karen Nyström, and together they planned to secure a continuous guideline from the main entrance down to a submerged chamber known among locals as the Crystal Hollow. The plan was for Lucas to dive first and secure the line, while Jonas and Karen assisted him from the surface. Lucas dove into the freezing water and successfully laid a line that stretched over 450 feet through narrow flooded passages. Elated by their progress, the three decided to go in together to test the new route. Once they reached a small air pocket at the end, they celebrated, convinced they were the first to map this section. But on the way back, something went wrong. Lucas felt Jonas tug at his fin, a signal that Karen was no longer behind them. Turning around, they found that she had vanished into a dark side tunnel. Lucas managed to catch up and signaled her to come back to the main line. They regrouped, but only moments later, Karen slipped away again, disappearing into another tight passage. Lucas and Jonas assumed she had taken an alternate exit to avoid a narrow squeeze they themselves used, so they continued toward the surface. When they surfaced and realized Karen was nowhere to be seen, they panicked. They immediately re-entered the water to search the side tunnels. But the icy currents stirred up clouds of silt, turning the labyrinth into a pitch-black nightmare. After hours of searching, they ran low on air and were forced to abandon the dive, emerging into the frigid dawn to call for help. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but with limited cave diving experience, they had to wait for specialized divers. For days, the search was hampered by freezing temperatures and near-zero visibility. After 3 days, the official search was suspended. Rescue turned into recovery. What no one realized was that Karen was still alive. She had taken a wrong tunnel that looped into a maze of flooded chambers. With her light fading and silt clouding the water, she managed to find a small pocket of air in a partially dry cavern. She tried to signal by tapping her tank against the rock, but no one heard. Karen survived for over 9 days, rationing her last scraps of food and scribbling messages in her dive log to her family. When rescuers finally found her location weeks later, they discovered her body curled near the water's edge, beside a note that read, "Tell Papa I didn't give up. I waited for you. I love you all." It was later discovered that one diver had come within 50 feet of the air pocket, but turned back because of zero visibility. An autopsy confirmed she died of hypothermia and starvation. While we can question her choice to split from the guideline, her determination to hold on in the face of darkness and freezing isolation has become part of Frostbite Cavern's tragic legacy, a chilling reminder of the unforgiving beauty that lies beneath the earth. It was April 14th, 1987, when Gregory Daniels, an experienced caver and scout leader, took his twin daughters, Rachel and Samantha, and 10 teenagers to explore Shadow Hollow, a cave system hidden deep in the forests of West Virginia. Gregory had explored many tight passages before and believed that if he could fit, so could the kids. Just after noon, they squeezed through Shadow Hollow's narrow 17 by 24-inch entrance into a small limestone chamber. Inside, Gregory noticed a few tunnels splitting off. Curious, he crawled into one to check if it connected to a larger chamber. The tunnel was slick with mud and only about 19 inches wide. Gregory slowly pulled himself forward on his stomach, updating his daughters as he went. Suddenly, the muddy floor gave way beneath him, and he slid into a wedge-shaped gap. His chest was wedged between rocks, arms pinned to his sides. He was stuck. Rachel and Samantha crawled in, trying to pull his feet, but every tug made the rocks wedge tighter. Realizing they couldn't help him alone, they sent one of the boys to get help. Within hours, cave rescue volunteers arrived, but the passage was so narrow, only one rescuer at a time could reach him. They tried using ropes and chisels, but the cramped space made it nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the cave's cold air sapped Gregory's body heat. Rescuers tried to pass food and water, but they couldn't reach his head. His voice grew weaker as the hours passed. The team considered digging down from the surface, but the thick bedrock made progress painfully slow. By Sunday morning, 2 days later, a medic crawled in with a portable heart monitor, but they couldn't get a clear reading. They hoped the cold was masking a faint pulse. Digging continued from above, but on Monday, they hit an unbreakable shale layer. Time was running out. When they finally reached him late Tuesday, Gregory was gone, his body still wedged in the narrow crevice, trapped by mud and stone. The autopsy confirmed he died of hypothermia. Shadow Hollow's entrance was permanently sealed soon after, and a plaque was placed at the site, reminding others of the hidden dangers beneath the earth. Mark Ellis and Daniel Harris, aged 27 and 24, wanted to map out the Deep Fall Cavern system in northern England, a notorious, barely explored network of underwater tunnels and tight squeezes. Years earlier, another diver named Alan Price had abandoned the mission after reaching a third underwater sump that seemed impossible to pass. But Mark and Daniel were determined to push further and see what lay beyond. Their first attempt didn't go as planned. Daniel injured his knee days before the dive, so Mark decided to explore solo, extremely dangerous in cave diving. Reaching the third sump was already a major feat. The route was long and tortuous, with the first sump located nearly a mile inside. The first two sumps were relatively short, 250 and 85 feet, so Mark crossed them without much trouble. But the third sump stretched over 850 feet, completely unexplored. He pushed on, and to his surprise, emerged into a twisting passage almost 1,800 feet long that led to a fourth sump no one had known about. Realizing he didn't have enough air to explore further, he turned back, planning to return with Daniel. A few weeks later, on July 12, 1983, the pair returned fully prepared with extra tanks. They made it through the first three sumps and reached sump 4, laying a guideline as they went. After about 400 feet, Daniel's line ran out, and he struggled with sinus pain. Instead of turning back, as the rule of thirds dictates, they pressed on, breaking a fundamental rule of cave diving. Never use more than 1/3 of your air to enter. Mark continued ahead, hoping the sump would soon open to an air pocket. He found what looked like a gravel wall, but it led nowhere. Spotting a small side passage, he pushed through another 30 feet, only to find a dead end. When he turned around, he was shocked to see Daniel still there, far deeper than he should have been. Mark signaled frantically that they had to leave. Daniel, realizing he likely didn't have enough air left to make it back, searched desperately for a hidden air pocket, but it didn't exist. Mark swam ahead, barely switching to his reserve tank just in time. He managed to make it out of sump 4 and sat on the bank waiting for Daniel, but he never appeared. After almost an hour, Mark knew Daniel was gone. He tried pulling the guideline, but it went slack. It had been cut near the 430-foot mark. Daniel probably tangled himself while changing tanks in the silty water, cut the line to free himself, then lost his bearings and swam the wrong way. Mark escaped and raised the alarm. Daniel's body wasn't found until 12 years later, in 1995. Due to the extreme risk, it was never recovered. A small plaque now marks the entrance in his honor. In 1996, another diver finally reached the elusive air pocket the two had hoped for, now called the Last Hope Chamber. Mark never broke the rule of thirds again, and went on to become one of the most respected cave divers of his generation. Today, Deep Fall Cavern remains locked, and only the most skilled divers are allowed entry. It took 12 years to find his body, still trapped in that underwater grave. Two divers thought they could map one of the most dangerous cave systems in the UK, but deep inside, they broke the golden rule of cave diving. One man's air ran out, the guideline was cut, and pitch-black silt swallowed every way out. While one barely escaped with minutes to live, the other vanished forever in total darkness.